This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Mali military wants 3-year transition and agrees to release deposed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Haftar rejects Government of National Accord's call for Libya ceasefire. And Nigeria to start antibody tests to determine the extent of the coronavirus outbreak in the country. Hello and a very warm welcome to you. This is Africa Live with me, Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, in business, Tunisia's unemployment rate gradually rises due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in sports, Bayern Munich crowned champions of Europe for a 6th time after beating PSG in Lisbon. We begin in Madagascar, where at least 20 inmates have been killed as authorities move to stop a riot in a prison. 8 others were seriously wounded. The incident happened in the south of the island nation. It is not clear at this time what triggered the confrontation. The commotion started after prisoners at the Farafagana prison split themselves into 2 groups and began attacking guards with stones. Authorities say the inmates seized a gun from one of the guards. So far, 31 convicts are still on the run, while 29 were rearrested. Amnesty International has previously protested the dilapidated state of prisons in the country. A 2018 report by the human rights organization also termed the prisons as ill-equipped with a lack of financial, material, and general support. Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola joins us now with more on that story. Angelo, what more can you tell us about the prison riot at this time?
Well, look, according to the Justice Ministry, at around noon yesterday is when the prisoners split into those 2 groups. Those on the west side started throwing, as you said, those stones at the guards, and those on the eastern side forced their way through an ablution block adjoining building to attack the guards from the side, so almost like a pincer movement. That's when they seized that weapon. We don't know how many prison officials have been injured at this time in that attack, but according to a statement issued, the Minister of Justice has also instructed the other 11 correctional facilities on the island to tighten their security as a precaution. So that's what we have at the moment. We don't know, as I said, how many guards have been injured or killed, or how many other civilians were killed in the breakout attempt.
And Angelo, what are the reasons behind the outbreak of violence in the prison?
Well, look, the reasons for the breakout are unclear at this time, but it's most likely to do with the prison conditions. Those conditions in the prisons are generally described as atrocious. Amnesty International, as you mentioned, investigated those prisons on the island in 2018. It found that 52 pre-trial detainees had died in those prisons in 2017 alone, and that's out of 129 people who were killed in that time as well. Many pre-trial detainees, including children and women, are held in lengthy detention for petty crimes such as minor theft. In another report, the International Committee for the Red Cross says almost half of the prisoners in Madagascar suffer from moderate or severe malnutrition. In 2015, for example, the ICRC documented 27 deaths in the country's prisons due to malnutrition alone. And overcrowding is also seen as another problem on the island. According to official data, the prisons are overpopulated to the tune of around 237.4%, and that was the last year that we have data for, so 2018. So not a good environment to be in generally.
And of course, the country's Justice Ministry has confirmed the incident. Do they now have a plan in place to stop the riots?
Well, it appears that they have the situation under control in that particular prison at this time, as far as we know. The fact that the Justice Ministry did issue and instruct the prison authorities at the other prisons to go to high alert level might be a precaution, but it shows just how volatile the situation is, and that has to do with the state of the prisons there. According to analysts, For now, it does appear, though, that they have things under control, but the situation will be tense and volatile, and it will take just a small spark to get prisoners in other prisons to try and also revolt against the conditions that they're living in at the moment. And of course, we have this whole COVID-19 situation as well. So the overcrowding plus the pandemic are making for a really toxic cocktail.
All right, Angelo, thank you very much for that. CGTN's Angelo Coppola joining us live there from Johannesburg. To Mali now, where the military says it will set up and lead a transitional body to rule the country for 3 years. The government will be directed by a body led by a soldier who will also be the head of state. The military has also agreed to release deposed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. He is still in military custody together with his political allies, including Prime Minister Boubou Cissé. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has the story.
A credible source from the junta has disclosed to AFP on condition of anonymity that the military has decided to go for a 3-year transitional government and have a soldier president for Mali. These are the proposals that were picked from a closed-door meeting in Bamako. The discussions were held by Malian military officers and members of the ECOWAS delegation led by former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan. But none of the leaders commented on the progress of the talks.
I don't need to give you this about what we're discussing, but you know there was an elected government. There were issues, and the military intervened. This is not the first time military has intervened in Mali. The last one was 8 years ago, 2012. There are also military intervention in some other West African states.
The source also says the junta has pledged to release Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, who's still held at a military base. The deposed leader has been detained since Tuesday together with other political leaders, including his Prime Minister, Boubou Cissé. Upon release, Keïta should be free to stay in his Bamako residence and free to travel for medical purposes. According to the anonymous informant, the transitional government will be tasked with reviewing the foundations of the Mali state.
Discussions continue. We have had points of compromise on certain aspects, and the negotiations will continue tomorrow. Thank you.
Merci.
This new development comes after the junta's promise last week to call for elections. Mali's neighbors have challenged the decision to have a military government. They say the ECOWAS delegation was to ensure the reinstatement of Keïta and the constitutional order. The military has suspended the law of the land since the coup last week. Prior to that, protesters had been on the street demanding Keïta's resignation. They were angered by alleged corruption and failure by the government to tackle the jihadi insurgency up north. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Well, the coup in Mali has once again cast a spotlight on military intervention in politics and governance in Africa. Before the junta ousted Mali's president earlier this week, many thought military coups on the continent were a thing of the past. CGTN's Deji Badmus reports.
They're supposed to protect their country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. But in the past, Africa's militaries have taken center stage in matters of governance. And often when these interventions happen, the soldiers and their civilian collaborators justify their actions as trying to right the supposed wrongs of the elected government they topple.
No, there cannot be any justification. Everybody, we know that a military coup is an aberration. It's anathema to democratic governance.
They are not trained to govern. By training, their training is to kill. Quelling insurrections and all the rest, unlike the police, who are trained for civil events. Now, for that same category of persons to take over the reins of, governance in a state, what democratic experience do they have?
Experts often blame military interventions as a reason for Africa's weak democratic institutions and poor development.
If you look at Nigeria critically, today the military is fighting Boko Haram. But look at it very carefully. The military takeover of this country actually plunged this country to where it is today. For me, they've done more harm than good. Because when you look at the trend of events and the number of years they've been in position, the kind of activities that took place throughout, you will discover that much of the problems, much of the crises we have in Nigeria could be in a way attributed to military takeovers. Now, the same thing is now being, played out in Mali.
But many military interventions like the one in Mali enjoy the support of the citizens. Critics say the Mali military is capitalizing on a wave of discontent against the elected government.
The democratic institutions in these countries are not strong enough yet. And so you find out that the very few countries where we have not had military coup are countries with stronger democratic ethos and institutions. So that gives you an idea. It also gives you an idea of the decline of the so-called democratization of the African political space.
The latest coup in Mali is the second in just 8 years. There's been strong condemnation from West African leaders. Regional bloc ECOWAS has imposed sanctions and threatened trade restrictions.
The reputation of the international community is at stake over this matter, whether it is the level of the United Nations, the African Union, ECOWAS, but more so ECOWAS because that is the regional organization that Mali belongs to. So ECOWAS has no choice than to tighten the political and diplomatic pressure on the military dictatorship in Mali.
How ECOWAS deals with the situation in Mali could affect how future military coups in Africa might play out. DJ Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, under development, unemployment amongst the youth and unsatisfactory strategies by most African countries are just some of the reasons why coups remain common. This is according to Lawrence Freeman, an economist on Matters Africa. The situation that followed the attack on Libya is also one of the reasons why Mali finds itself in its current situation. CGTN's Nick Mudimba had a conversation with Freeman.
Mali had its first coup back in 2012, and it was a result of the United States government, Obama administration, of overthrowing Gaddafi, the president of Libya. And that resulted of an invasion in northern Mali of Tuaregs, which combined with the extremists attempted to destroy the government of Mali. And Mali has never been the same since. The north has been occupied by the extremists, and they've been unable to control their country. And the country was never developed. What's happening is because the lack of economic development in Africa, you have very restless population. You have young people who do not have confidence in their government because they don't see any economic development for themselves and their families. Look, there's no infrastructure. Only in the last 10 years has China begun to invest in infrastructure. Northern Mali, in the whole Sahel, there's no water. Why don't we have water development? Why don't we have water management? Why hasn't there been electricity? There's 100,000 megawatts for 1 billion people, which is criminal. So the ICC has played no useful role. And the economic institutions of the West have played no useful role. And they basically use the conditions, the poor economic conditions of Africa to manipulate the kinds of policies they want to impose. For example, human rights. What more basic human right is the right to clean water, the right to food, the right to live? These human rights are ignored by the West, and they focus on other areas, and they use them to manipulate and organize the population to overthrow governments that the West finds are not working with them and not carrying out their policies.
To Libya now, where the Libyan National Army has dismissed a ceasefire announcement by Libya's internationally recognized government, saying it is a marketing stunt. According to the LNA spokesman Ahmed Mismari, rival forces from the west are mobilizing around front lines in the center of Libya. He further claims that the eastern-based forces are ready to respond to any attempt to attack its positions around the coastal cities of Sirte and Jufra. This marked the first time the LNA made a statement after last week's announcement of a ceasefire and a call for the resumption of oil production by the Tripoli-based government of national accord. Well, CGTN's Adel Makhroui joins us for more on the situation in Libya. From Cairo, Egypt, Adele, why is Khalifa Haftar rejecting the Tripoli-based Government of National Accord's call for a ceasefire?
So this is not a rejection. It's basically a dismissal to the intentions for the government of national accord. And Khalifa Haftar, the head of the Libyan National Army, has not personally given any statement yet. This is the spokesman of the Libyan National Army coming to say that they have spotted their surveillance by air and on the ground, have spotted military mobilization from the militia side, from the government of national accord, and also they accused Turkey of sending frigates and Navy vessels in the Mediterranean towards Sirte. And that's the remark. That's why they have been labeling it as a stunt, as you've briefly mentioned. So basically, the government, the Libyan National Army, believes that despite the calls for a ceasefire, there is movement on the ground from the rivals in the west, supported by Turkey, that appears to be doing the other way around. They are increasing their military presence, arms by navy and on the ground, and this is what has alarmed them. The Libyan National Army has neither confirmed its abidance to the ceasefire, nor has it defied it, at least not yet.
And Adele, how exactly has General Haftar's Libyan National Army been able to marshal military support in order to take on the Tripoli-based Government of National Accord?
So, as we all know, and it has been quite clear for some time now, that the civil war in Libya has been fueled by international and regional powers. Both have been breaching the arms embargo imposed by the United Nations, and this has been a source of pain and agony to the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who has numerously pointed out to the violations to the ceasefire. Arms have been flowing into the Government of National Accord and to the Libyan National Army as well, and this has been pushing each side to continue this very long domestic confrontation and violence for months. Khalifa Haftar has been able to rally all the way with his military power to the outskirts of Tripoli, and just in the past few months we've seen, with the support from Turkey, that the Government of National Accord has been able to push them back all the way now to where they both stand on the outskirts of Sirte. Khalifa Haftar, his LNA forces are having a stronghold over that strategic city, which many geopolitical analysts have been indicating it's the gate to the oil fields. If Sirte goes to the Government of National Accord, they will have very little resistance for them to march all the way to control the oil fields, which is basically the core of this Libyan conflict. So both of them have been gaining arms from foreign and regional and international powers that have been fueling this war, and that's what the UN is trying to put a full stop to. There is a hope that with the current call for a ceasefire, this might encourage the parties concerned with Libya to just slow a bit their fueling of arms to this Libyan conflict and focus more on the negotiation track.
And finally, Adele, what next for Libya if indeed this standoff continues further?
Well, basically, we are at quite a pivotal turning point for Libya at this moment. There is an announcement for a ceasefire from the Government of National Accord, its head Faiz Sarraj, who represents the Western powers, the militias in Western Libya. And we also have a similar declaration for a ceasefire from the Eastern-backed parliament. The Speaker of the Parliament, Aqil Salah, has made that announcement. So these are the biggest two political representatives for the Libyan rivals. That means there is a chance for negotiations, there is a chance for resumption of the military and political talks, which could make Libya see a political breakthrough. However, with reluctance from the Libyan National Army, with the claimed mobilization of military power from both sides at the decisive line of Sirte and Al Jufra, it seems that neither sides are showing any trust in the other, and they're all in a combat standby, preparing for the other side to attack first. If this is at least maintained this sort of indirect truce. This could see the political and military tracks move forward. Now, if we go to the negotiating table, this might see some resolutions if the international powers concerned with Libya are pushing for this reconciliation to happen. Otherwise, it could be most probably like the several calls for ceasefires that have been breached and the several political talks that have only ended in failure.
All right, thank you very much for that. CGTN's Adel Mahroui joining us live there from Cairo. Well, we head back to West Africa, where Cote d'Ivoire President Alassane Ouattara has been formally nominated by the ruling party to stand for a third term in the October elections. This comes despite protests by groups opposed to his candidature. But as CGTN's Jane Keo reports, the president insists that nothing prevents him from being a candidate.
With President Alassane Ouattara's formal nomination for a third term, the West African nation is now looking forward to the October elections that could be another showdown. Opposition groups have been staging protests against his decision, but Ouattara says he sees nothing wrong with his quest for another term.
Some voices were raised some time ago against my decision to stand for a third term. It is an erroneous interpretation of the Constitution of the Third Republic. They forget that it was I who initiated the Third Republic. I want to tell these activists that if there had not been a Third Republic, no one could have been a candidate, neither Alassane Ouattara, Henry Konan Bedie, nor Laurent Gbagbo.
Several people have already died in the protests. However, his supporters say the ruling party is committed to peace and development.
The RHDP party is committed to pursuing all efforts for peace, reconciliation and harmonious development of our beautiful country.
As Ouattara digs in, protesters are vowing to stay the course and stop what they term as the president's unconstitutional move to extend his rule.
We don't want Ouattara's third term. It's dictatorship. We don't want dictatorship anymore.
The West African nation's Electoral Commission has so far rejected appeals by former President Laurent Gbagbo, together with a former ally of Ouattara, Guillaume Soro, to be allowed to participate in the October elections. Ouattara rose to power in 2010 after a civil war that saw his predecessor Laurent Gbagbo ousted and captured by UN and French forces. Now there are worries that another round of unrest could be witnessed before, during or after the October polls. Jane Keo, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live here on CGTN. It's time for us to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's take you to Uganda now, where mass testing for COVID-19 at a state prison in the north of the country has left authorities worried. According to the country's Ministry of Health, the tests revealed 152 new infections, and that number accounts for the majority of cases reported by the country's health ministry in a single day. CGTN's Leon Senyange now reports.
The large cluster of cases was found through mass testing of inmates at a government prison in northern Uganda. 152 inmates and one staff member were found to be positive for coronavirus. The number is close to half of the 318 confirmed cases reported by the ministry on Saturday. It is the highest number of new infections reported in a single day.
It is possible that a prisoner from a Muru community could have been taken to the prison with infection while asymptomatic. In any case, Amuru district is one of the hotspot districts with a high level of community transmission.
All the confirmed cases from the prison have been transferred to an auxiliary isolation facility, where they are being attended to by a medical team. Authorities say 27 prison staff are also under quarantine. The COVID-19 cases may be more pronounced in one correction center in the north of the country, but the worst is feared for several others as prison population continues to surge. According to authorities, the number of inmates has jumped more than 10% since March. There are roughly 64,000 inmates in the system. Medical conditions and food practices have improved, but facilities remain congested.
We continue to get prisoners from the courts. Probably what I would urge is that the judiciary should only send those who should be in prison, not petty offenders. They should send those who are a danger to society. Those are the ones who should be behind bars, especially at this critical time of this pandemic.
Transmission rates are also on the rise outside prison walls. The capital Kampala registered 342 cases last week.
This virus is exploiting every possible means to infect and kill. And it is a virus which asks all of us to obey certain measures to prevent ourselves and the community.
Last month, the government eased some of its lockdown restrictions that have been in place since March. Businesses and public transport are in operation with safety guidelines like wearing masks and keeping social distance being enforced. But with the spike, authorities say a second lockdown is a possibility. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now in Kenya, there remain many misconceptions about the coronavirus pandemic, especially in rural and remote areas. And that is despite multiple awareness campaigns about COVID-19. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi reports on the situation in Turkana County.
As the number of coronavirus infections and deaths continue to rise in Africa, so does public anxiety, particularly in rural areas where primary health care is often lacking. Africa, just like the rest of the world, is struggling to contain the spread of the virus. The problem is further compounded by a familiar enemy during pandemics: misinformation. Some people in this part of Kenya still believe that the coronavirus cannot survive under extreme temperatures and therefore cannot get infected with the virus.
We hear the coronavirus is there, far away in Nairobi, but not here. Here we have hunger, malaria among adults and children. Even our goats have their own diseases, and that's how we view the coronavirus.
I would say initially we had that mentality that actually COVID-19 maybe doesn't exist, and Turkana being a hot area, that maybe you cannot get infected in such an environment. But of course that myth has been dismantled when we started having cases.
Turkana County recorded its first coronavirus case in May. Since then, the county has registered over 80 cases, with 63 recoveries and no deaths reported so far. Compared to other counties like Nairobi and Mombasa, where COVID-19 cases are higher, Turkana seems to be managing the situation well. Despite rising infections, some choose to not follow the precautionary measures.
My mask is inside the house. If I'm going to town or in case visitors are coming here, I wear my mask. But if I'm alone, I see no need to wear a mask, and no one talks about it. That's how we are.
When we wake up early in the morning, we do house chores and follow the guidelines of regular hand washing. And when we go to town, we wear our masks, and where there are many people, we observe physical distancing.
Local authorities are working to educate people on the importance of wearing face masks and regularly washing hands as measures to avert community infections.
Please protect yourself. Make sure you put on mask. Make sure you honor social distance. there's no need of gathering together because we are not talking of outside now. We are talking of our own, whom we know by name, and as our neighbors, they are positive.
Community volunteers have now been deployed to help disseminate information about the coronavirus in an attempt to stop its spread within communities. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Turkana, Kenya.
To Christchurch in New Zealand, where the sentencing hearing has begun for the man who murdered scores of people at 2 mosques. The 29-year-old Australian gunman pleaded guilty to 51 murders and 40 attempted murders. He will likely face a life prison term, possibly without parole. The gunman showed little emotion when family members of the victims described the horror of the massacre.
May you get the severest punishment for your evil act in this life and in the hereafter. We know that Allah is the most just. You transgressed and you thought you can break us. You failed miserably. We became more determined to hold tight to Islam, and our beloved ones are martyrs.
Burying one dead friend is heartbreaking. How about burying a one of a kind? A one of a kind that is my son, Atta, and 49 beloved brothers and sisters in one go. No words can describe what my heart experienced at that time and still experiencing. It is only the remembrance of Allah that keeps me going.
Well, it's just about time for us to check in on all the day's business. Here's what's coming up. Tunisia's unemployment rate gradually rises due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Tanzania encourages people to consume more local coffee.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Tunisia's unemployment rate hit 18% in the second quarter of 2020 as the estimated number of unemployed people reached almost 800,000 people. This compares to the 0.6 million people that had been recorded in the first quarter of the year after the COVID-19 pandemic took a toll on its ailing economy. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi has more details.
Tunisian authorities assert that the high unemployment rate is a result of the social and economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the active population in the country. Data from the National Institute of Statistics in Tunisia showed unemployment rate has risen significantly in the second quarter of 2020 to 746,000 people.
The coronavirus pandemic surprised us. It created an unexpected crisis and left a large number of people unemployed. It's a shock for the economic and social fabric, which deepened the state's difficulties and imposed a new reality onto the government.
Thousands of unemployed graduates have been demonstrating in many regions. Some of these graduates have been unemployed for years. The COVID-19 crisis has only complicated the situation. In fact, the number of unemployed higher education graduates is estimated on average at 286,000 in the second quarter of 2020, compared to 258,000 in the first 6 months of the year.
It's unacceptable that university graduates who spend years studying do not get the chance to work in any company or state institution. We've been neglected by the successive governments.
The state wants to get rid of us. Creating jobs is the state's responsibility. The COVID-19 crisis is not the main reason for unemployment. We've been unemployed since 2011. The crisis has only exacerbated the mismanagement, incompetence, and absence of concrete solutions.
Over 5,000 PhD holders from different specialties have staged sit-ins to shed light on their precarious situation, which is expected to worsen because the government has put direct hold on civil service employment for the next 2 years.
The post-COVID-19 period is supposed to be an era of scientific research and opportunities for researchers and PhD holders. The unemployment rate has reached alarming levels. The situation will not improve because the worst is yet to come.
The Ministry of Social Affairs says Tunisia's youth unemployment rate is 36.1%. This rate is estimated at 36% for men and 37.3% for women. According to the National Institute of Statistics, over 200,000 people have lost their jobs in the industry, agriculture, service, tourism and construction sectors since the outbreak of the coronavirus crisis. Experts assert that this number is expected to rise in the next 3 months. Abdel Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Tanzanian coffee producers are encouraging more local consumption following reduced demand in global markets after COVID-19. According to the International Coffee Organization, Tanzanian coffee exports have dropped by 47.5% between June 2019 and June this year. Coffee generates an average of $100 million annually for the country. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has more from Dar es Salaam.
Mrusha Jones, a coffee enthusiast, is trying to promote premium coffee to Tanzanians. To achieve his goal, he has organized a coffee tasting event. He says Tanzanians are not enjoying the country's best coffee.
If you look at our exports, mainly 70% Arabica, and good beans are not locally consumed. So being an acquired taste, this is part of the process to grow local consumption of the coffee.
Tanzania's premium coffee often finds its way to cafes in Europe, Asia and the United States. With COVID-19 making exporting difficult, many farmers have been left with a large unsold stock. This farmer sees additional knowledge as key to now capturing the local market.
If a farmer is given the right education on how to taste his coffee, it will be easy for him to get what he deserves when he takes his product to the market, and this will change his life to a great extent.
Without a reliable market for its coffee, Tanzania has a lot to lose. Government statistics show that 90% of the crop is grown by about 450,000 families. Indirectly, it makes a living for about 3.6 million people.
Tanzania consumes between 5 and 7% of the coffee it produces. The Tanzania Coffee Board says it hopes to get this number to 15% within the next 10 years in order to reduce dependency on foreign markets, but also create more jobs locally.
Mrusha says lack of knowledge is keeping locals from consuming premium coffee. To remedy this, he plans to set up a coffee festival and several coffee-related competitions. Current trends give him hope that his plan might just work.
I think the future is bright. If you look at the last 4 years, almost every quarter there has been a new coffee shop, either specialty or just a traditional coffee shop that is supported by other food products being opened, especially in the big cities like Dar es Salaam and Arusha.
As tasters at this event sip away, Mrusha hopes that his efforts will help Tanzanian coffee drinkers and producers get a taste of a better future. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Let's take you to Nigeria now, where the central bank is introducing a raft of measures to try and cushion commercial banks from a steep rise in the number of businesses failing to pay back loans amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The banks are facing $47 billion worth of bad debt, and there is concern that without drastic steps, they might even collapse. Phil Ihaza reports from Abuja.
The pandemic has hit businesses in Nigeria hard. Thousands have defaulted in repaying their loans due to COVID-19, leaving commercial banks struggling to cope. Back in April, the Central Bank of Nigeria promised to do its best to help businesses repay their outstanding debts.
We make funds available to them in the health sector, in the small and medium enterprises, in the manufacturing sector, in the agri sector, make funds available to them as quickly as possible and at concessionary rates and also give those even who have existing loans in the banks an opportunity to restructure their loans and push forward their repayments, then it should be easy for us to get businesses back alive.
There has since been a small improvement. The ratio of bad loans declined from 6.6% in April to 6.4% in June. But as of last month, over 35,000 credit facilities worth $47 billion are still being owed by businesses across the country. And nearly half of the entire debt is owed by businesses in the oil and gas sector. Crude oil is Nigeria's #1 earner.
Bank exposure to small businesses in Nigeria is very low. Most facilities are given to quote and unquote the big boys, most of which are in oil and gas. So if you want to get your money back, the policy should be targeted towards those that have huge burden, not those that have less burden. In the case of pandemic, nobody planned for that. It changed the trend, it changed the fundamentals. Nobody knew what was going to happen tomorrow. But the good news is the price have started to climb, but gradually. But when they don't make bank repayment a priority, I'm sorry, the bank will still have to suffer.
The central bank has temporarily suspended loan interest and repayment on principal debts of up to 1/3 of the entire credit facility owed by businesses so far. But experts say interventions may only be a short-term solution to recovering the huge debts owed by various businesses in the country.
What should be done is for banks to find the equity capital of such businesses and take over such businesses. Bank can create an arm that is in oil and gas, and they use part of their investment they have. So it may be non-interest of some sort. The world is actually moving towards non-interest, if you ask me.
In 2005, the central bank had to step in to cut down and consolidate most of the country's troubled commercial banks from about 90 to 25, and just 22 of them are now in operation.
To revamp Africa's largest economy and free commercial banks from a huge debt burden, experts say the country may need to hastily diversify from crude oil sales and develop its infrastructure to encourage more manufacturing and processing of its abundant raw materials. This, they say, will boost the revenue of businesses and prevent the economy from slipping into recession. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Well, it's time for us to take another short break. Here's what's coming up in our digital safari series. We bring you the little secret of a young hyena in the Masai Mara.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Now to our continued look at the wildebeest migration in Kenya. And today we bring you coverage from the Pride Lands, where a young female hyena has a little secret to share with us. Let's take a look.
Yesterday on CGTN's Digital Safari, there was an air of relaxation surrounding the Mara. Nearby, a pride of lions and their cubs were making short work of a wildebeest carcass. A troop of baboons were grooming each other on the banks of the river and got a front row seat to the antics of the hippos below. further south in Pinda. A lucky cheetah began her morning with a hearty, hard-earned meal. While the elusive black rhino treated us to a show, if only for a few seconds. Later that morning, Damon managed to find a mother giraffe and her tiny calf soaking up the sun's rays, still wobbly on their legs at such an early age. The mother giraffe remains ever vigilant as she scans the savannah for predators. Meanwhile, in Juma, we spent the morning with the Nkuhuma Pride, as they had a lethargic day dozing and chasing the shade. Over in Pride Lands, animals of all shapes and sizes decided to meet up at Ndlovu Dam. The warthog trotted down to the water's edge, while the monkeys pestered the impala. All of them working in unison to spot potential threats. A young female hyena was seen guarding an old termite mound. It has been reported that she is lactating. Let us hope that in upcoming episodes, a generous and cute secret will be revealed. Join us every day at 4:30 GMT on CGTN digital platforms for your very own virtual safari through the African wild.
And here's what's coming up on Africa Live Sport. Bayern Munich